So we want to welcome Commissioner Carr. He has been spending a lot of time talking about the importance of 5G to the economy and we're hoping to get it in by 2019. Some of our carriers are telling us we already have it. And the other thing is understanding how the actual infrastructure is implemented and the importance of having it across the United States, hence a lot of the tower visits and the cows. So he will be probably talking about that and other things that are priorities to him at the commission. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Yes, it's super exciting to be here, talk about 5G. During the government shutdown, I kept busy growing this really ugly facial hair that I call a beard. It was a very productive time, although it didn't turn out very well, as you can now see. But I actually do want to start to note we are back to full strength at the FCC. We have about 1,400 really hard-working public servants there. About 200 stayed working during the shutdown, and I really can't thank them enough for their hard work, their professionalism, their dedication. It really is just a tremendous example set by the FCC staff. I had a chance to thank them in the building during the shutdown, those that were still there. I also got a chance to go out to one of our remote facilities in Columbia, Maryland, and recognize some of the hardworking teams that stayed there and worked during the shutdown. Today, I want to talk a little bit, as the title of this event is, the state of the net. And the state of the net, in short, is strong. High-speed broadband has never been faster, cheaper, or more available to more Americans in history than it is now. And even with all that good news, there is more to come. We're on this cusp, as you know, to this new generation of technology, particularly on the wireless side, when we talk about 5G. But if you step back and think more broadly about the convergence in this space, convergence is something we've talked about as regulators for years, and we're now starting to see it in practical ways that we've never seen before. Again, you have 5G, but it's not the only technology. We have Bluetooth 6 that's out there, Bluetooth 5 that's out there, Wi-Fi 6. We've got 10G on the wired networks. We've got these new fixed wireless deployments and a new generation of low Earth orbit satellites. So I think from the perspective of Americans and communities around the country, there's tremendous reason to be optimistic right now about where we're going with the internet. One thing I want to focus on today has been one of my top priorities at the agency, which is 5G and seeing this new high-speed wireless network powered by many, many miles of wired connections deployed in every community around the country. As I've talked about it, I really see 5G as transformational, not just from a technological perspective, but from an economic perspective as well. And I want to add a new point to that today, which is 5G values. This is not just going to be about technology and the economy. It's going to be about the values that are embedded in technology for a decade to come. And I say that cognizant of yesterday's DOJ indictment alleging crimes against Huawei, including IP theft. And I think that's going to tie into some of the discussion today. But stepping back again, when I think about this global race to 5G, when I think about seeing 5G deployed in communities across the country, it really is about our economic leadership into this next decade. Those are the stakes. Here's how we know it. Think back 10 years ago when we were on the cusp of the last transition in wireless from 3G to 4G. Back then, the biggest companies, the biggest drivers of our economy were big banks and big oil. If you flash forward to today, the largest companies are Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. These are all tech companies. They're American companies, and predominantly they're riding on this new mobile high-speed broadband network. Think about your own life 10 years ago. Think about getting a ride across town. If you were to do it, it would involve picking up the phone, calling a phone number, waiting for a cab, hopefully to show up, and paying exorbitant rates to get where you're going. Think about all the rides that you just didn't even bother to go on because it was too difficult, too costly. Now, right in your smartphone, you open up an app, whether it's Uber, Lyft, Via, many other options. You have choices right there that's a swipe away. Think about more broadly getting places. Again, 10 years ago, getting ready to go on a trip, you have to go onto MapQuest from your desktop computer, print out the MapQuest directions. Remember getting in the car, going on a road trip and saying, did you print out the MapQuest directions? Did you remember to do that? Now, again, you open up your phone and you have turn-by-turn directions right there on your smartphone. Or my favorite example that I like to use that my staff doesn't like me to use, think about your dating life. So 10 years ago, when I was meeting future Miss Carr, dating involved actually having to walk up to somebody in real life, no avatars, use your words and talk to them, and go through the stress and the anxiety of actually asking them out on a date. Now the younger millennials on my staff tell me a future loved one is merely a swipe away. All of these innovations, such as they are, these are riding on this 4G network. In the United States is the world's tech and innovation hub. Almost all of those companies that I've been talking about got their start in the US. And the reason why that is, it's not by chance or by luck. A big reason is the US won the global race to 4G. We had the platform that allowed the innovators and the entrepreneurs to create the entire app economy and everything else that rides on these 4G networks. When you look back at the data, winning the race to 4G added about $100 billion to our GDP. It led to $125 billion in revenue for US companies that could have gone abroad. It grew our wireless jobs in the US by 84%, and it helped support today's $950 billion a year app economy. And again, if you think back 10 years, there was very, very few people that could have seen the transformational changes that would have come going from 3G to 4G. And we're going to see that again at an exponential level in this transition from 4G to 5G. There's sort of a little debate about what is 5G, what is it going to mean? And for simplicity, I think of it in sort of three broad buckets. One, it's actually the least interesting. It's everything that you can do on your smartphone today, you can do faster. So if you download a movie now and it takes 6 minutes, 7 minutes, maybe it's 6 or 7 seconds. Not a huge deal in comparison to, I think, everything else that 5G is going to unleash. But just with that alone, that's all we had going from 3G to 4G, was essentially our cell phones doing the same thing they were doing before, but doing it faster. And we're certainly going to get that with 5G. But there's a second and third piece. A second piece that I'm focused on is more competition for home broadband. 5G, backed by the wired connections that run through the network, is going to enable providers to compete even more vigorously in the high-speed home broadband market. You can deliver wirelessly, essentially, fiber-like speeds over that last mile, so you can reach economically communities and provide that high-speed broadband that today has been difficult on the edges to do purely with wired fiber connections. And I think that's going to be transformative in terms of, again, even better, even faster, even cheaper broadband. The third piece is sort of the unknowns. We only have a glimpse of what fits in that third bucket. It's going to be an entire new wave of innovation that, from a regulatory humility perspective, we have to admit we don't entirely know what it's going to unleash, but we have a glimpse. Things like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, virtual reality, connected cars, new telehealth applications. These are what I put in that third big bucket of transformational technological and economic changes that 5G can unleash. In knowing all this, we're not the only country in the world that sees the potential for 5G. We're not the only country that wants to use 5G to flip the script. One of our biggest competitors is China. They view 5G, as I said, as an opportunity to establish themselves as the global dominant leader in technology and in economic growth for the next decade. So the challenge is very real. And the challenge really, at the end of the day, is an infrastructure one. China has been deploying the new small cells and other physical infrastructure needed for 5G at a much faster clip than the US. In 2015, for instance, they deployed 350,000 new cell sites. In the US, we deployed 30,000 over that same period of time. China's been deploying new cell sites at a pace of 460 new ones a day. That's 12 times the pace that we were moving at the FCC in the US. And so when you step back and think about this global challenge that 5G presents, this global opportunity, there's the whole aspect of the economic opportunity that's going to come with leading 5G. But I also think another piece of it that hasn't been talked about a lot is the values that are at stake with 5G. What values do we want built into 5G? Do we want permissionless innovation? Do we want free speech? Do we want rule of law? And do we want IP protections? Again, I say this in the context of just yesterday, seeing the DOJ charges filed against Huawei that allege, among other things, IP theft. And so when I think about this in terms of 5G, in terms of the outcome, it's a value fight. What values we want in that system. But also it's a value fight in terms of how we get there. How do we win this race to 5G? And it's a difference between leaning on the free market, which is where we are in the US, and getting the government out of the way so the private sector can invest and compete in the deployment of 5G networks, or the system that they have in place in China, which is a slightly different approach to infrastructure projects. For my part, I'm all in on getting the government in the US out of the way and letting our private sector compete in the deployment of this next generation infrastructure. And I can tell you we've moved very quickly, very aggressively at the FCC on this front. I should caveat aggressively with appropriately aggressively. In March of last year, for instance, we took a look at some of our federal rules that applied whenever you tried to put up a new antenna site. Again, think back to 3G, 4G era. A lot of these new antenna sites were these large 200-foot towers. There were costly environmental reviews, costly historic reviews that applied at the federal level that may have made sense given the footprint and nature of those 200-foot towers. But applying those same old laws to these new small cells, which can be as small as a backpack, it can go on an existing utility pole or light pole, made no sense. And it really threatened to hold back the deployment of 5G across the country. So we excluded small cells from those federal historic and environmental regulations. It's expected to save about $1.56 billion in red tape. In September, we saw another challenge. Some of the biggest cities in the country were imposing essentially a 5G tax. They were looking at this massive and necessary rollout of new small cells as a revenue-generating opportunity. And to some extent, I don't blame them for looking to raise revenue wherever they can, but there's two problems with that. One, the record at the FCC showed that it was slowing down and stopping the deployment of these new small cells and next-gen infrastructure in big cities themselves. And second of all, our goal, of course, is to see 5G in every community in the country. So even if it could make sense to deploy in the wake of these massive 5G taxes, it was sucking up the capital needed to make sure 5G is deployed in surrounding and rural communities as well. So we stepped in and clarified our rules and put some, from my perspective, common sense guardrails in place to make sure cities are fully compensated for their costs when it comes to reviewing this infrastructure, but that we don't see exorbitant fees imposed in those big cities slowing down 5G deployment. Again, that decision cut another about $2 billion in regulatory costs. And all of these decisions are starting to pay dividends. If you step back, infrastructure deployment in the U.S. is now up. Investment in broadband networks is now up. Speeds, broadband speeds in the U.S. are now up. Prices are down, and we're seeing more choices and more competition. One infrastructure provider, for instance, reported that they're now clearing small cells for construction at 6 times the pace that they were before. One infrastructure provider says that they're now going to double the small cells that they deployed this year compared to last year, perhaps up to 15,000 with just this one provider, 15,000 new nodes in 2019. And on the speed side, we've seen a 35% increase in speeds from 2017 to 2018. So these are all great indicators of things heading in the right direction. They're all indicators that because of the steps we've taken and that we're going to continue to take, 2019 can be the year of 5G. And real quick, I want to make one last point before closing. When I think about this massive infrastructure deployment we need to do for 5G, there's lots of jobs that's going to sustain. And we need to make sure that Americans are prepared to participate in this new economy, both in terms of the coders and the programmers that are going to create these new inventions that ride on 5G networks, but also the hard, good-paying jobs needed to deploy this infrastructure. I spent a lot of time in this job outside of DC with the telecom crews, the tower workers that are building these next-generation networks, and they're doing a phenomenal job. But there's more we can do, I think, from the government perspective, and I plan to work on this year, to make sure we have the skilled workforce in place and the training needed to deploy these networks. We've been looking, for instance, at some pretty basic community college programs, short courses that can give a basic baseline skill set and allow lots of Americans to get into this good-paying field of deploying these next-generation networks. So those are going to be our priorities as we look forward to this year, more work to deploy 5G infrastructure, and more work to make sure we have the 5G jobs in place to do it. Really appreciate the chance to offer a few words, and if we're out of time, we're out of time, and if not, I can take some questions, but I'm told we are out of time because of the snow. If you can believe that. If you don't, you can talk to him. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.